Hello, my name is Jaru, and today we will be ranking in a tier list all of my theories based on how well they performed in the release and aftermath of Chapter 5. To quickly explain the tiers, at the bottom we have debunked, which is for theories that were, proven wrong. Above it we have stonks or down, which is for theories that had evidence against them, like notable evidence, but were not necessarily disproven. Stonks are slightly down, which is for theories that weren't really, like, all three of these middle tiers are for theories that really weren't discussed all that much, but with each of, like, with neutral, they weren't discussed at all. With stonks are slightly down and stonks are slightly up, it's for theories that might, depending on how you squint, have gotten a little evidence against them or a little evidence in favor of them, but generally these three tiers are kind of interchangeable. And then stonks are up, which is for theories that got notable evidence in favor of them. And then Apollo blesses me, which is for theories that were explicitly confirmed. Now, before we go any further, I should point out that my voice is a little groggy at the moment. I got up a little early to record this, so if I sound barely conscious, that's why. But my mind is sharp enough, I think, for this. The other thing I should point out is that this is very similar to a video I did after Chapter 3 and 4 came out. However, there is one major difference. In that video, I ranked my theory videos based on how well they had fared, and that ended up proving a bit messy because my videos usually aren't actually about one specific idea. They're usually about dozens of smaller theories stacked on top of one another, which means that any given video could have, parts of it that could go into any one of these tiers and other parts that could go on the opposite end of the spectrum. So, like, for example, my Roaring Night theory from my several-hour Roaring Night video was that there would be a Dustner, which is to say a Darkner made from the dust and hammer of Gerson Boom, and that entity would be the Roaring Knight. Now, the part about me predicting that there would be a Darkner based on the hammer and dust and Gerson Boom was so spot on that it deserves to go in Apollo Blesses Me. However, the part where I predicted that he'd be the Roaring Knight would probably go in either debunked or at least stonks or down, since there's a lot of evidence to suggest that he isn't the Roaring Knight. As such, it was a little awkward because, like, as a whole, technically the theory wasn't correct, but it was really two different theories, one about the existence of the old man and the other about the role he would play. So if I had properly split those up, one would have gone into Apollo Blesses Me and the other in Stonks Are Down or Debunked. So instead, in order to not have that weird messiness and uncertainty on what's going on, I went back through my videos and collected every single individual theory concept that I have either come up with or endorsed to some extent. Yeah, here they are. As you can see, there's a lot. At the last count, I think there's like at least 80, like 80. So we've got a lot to cover. And this is a bit of an ugly word salad at the moment. It's not the prettiest tier list by any stretch, but I was prioritizing clarity and specificity over everything. So, like, for example, the Earth has a soul, Azrael's dead, Ralsei is made from Azrael's dust. Like, each individual block is legible. It's just when they're in word salad mode that it's a little hard to read. But regardless, these are all of my theories. And one of the useful elements of this tier list and of this video is that this is quite comfortably the most concise collection of my theories in one place. Like, this is pretty much everything I believe to be true, or at least believed at one point to be true, about Deltarune. Now, this isn't completely exhaustive. There are some of my older theories that I didn't include because I've since disowned them, like Deltarune being an alternate timeline. I just don't believe that anymore. I don't think it's an alternate timeline to Undertale. I think it's an alternate universe to Undertale. So I just didn't include it in this video because I don't believe it anymore. Or Azrael, or us being like the theory that Azrael's Dust 1.0 wasn't included because I no longer believe that we are playing as Azrael. So, I believe something else now. So I didn't include that. And while I do still believe most of these theories, there is like one or two that as I was collecting them, I realized that I no longer really believe, but I've never gone out of my way to explicitly disown them. So I included them in this list to make it clear that I no longer believe in them. However, the vast majority of these, I think I still believed, at least I still believed them at the start of Chapter 5. And while some of them I no longer believe, or I think perhaps are wrong, thanks to new information I got from Chapter 5, I still think they're worth talking about. And yeah, so those are all of my theories, and we are going to be discussing all of them and ranking them. If you like this video, consider subscribing, and if you would like to get early access to my videos, consider supporting me on Patreon. For $1 a month, you can get access to all the content on there, including content that YouTube tries to copyright strike. For example, my blind playthrough of Deltarune Chapter 5 and my blind reaction to, well, not my blind reaction, but just my blind playthrough has been hit with some copyright claims on YouTube, and so it can't go live yet without, massively restraining the success of the video. But it's all available on Patreon, so if you want to go over there, take a look. So with all that said, I think we're ready to begin. I might be forgetting some preamble. In case it isn't obvious, I don't have a script. This is just off-the-cuff recording. But yeah, I think it's this should be interesting. Thank you for joining. And for people who have never seen my theories, this is a pretty decent introduction to what I think is going on in Deltarune. And I think some of my viewers have told me is that in isolation, some of my theories seem like madness, but within the broader picture of all of my theories, they start to make more sense. So yeah, well, that's enough preamble. Let's get started. We won't be, there's no specific order we're doing these in. I'm just going to grab one. Let's start with this one. The Earth has a soul. This is my theory that, well, it's kind of what it says on the tin. Just the idea that the Earth is alive, it has a soul. This isn't a theory that necessarily got acknowledged all that much in the video, or in Chapter 5. Again, this is a tier list based on how well they did in the wake of Chapter 5. So it's not necessarily how much I think they're true. Like, this is a theory I think is like 100% true. Like, my faith in it is fully as strong as it's ever been. But this isn't rating based on how true that I think they are. I'm rating based on how well Chapter 5 has treated them. And this one goes in neutral. I don't remember there being any specific mention of the Earth or the soul of the Earth or anything like that. Actually, that's not true. I just remembered. There's one save point. I think it's the one where you can first see the flower castle in the distance, and I think it said the Earth breathes a fountain into the sky, and that's characterizing the Earth as alive once again. So yeah, I'd say stonks are slightly up for Earth as a soul. Pretty solid stuff. Next, we have Azrael is dead. This is perhaps one of my most iconic theories. And this is also one of the more iconic examples of my theories being too many. Because, like, I could have just put Azrael's Dust theory here as the thing I'm putting in the tier list. But in reality, Azrael's Dust theory is a bunch of different theories combined together. Both some of them about Azrael, some of them about Ralsei, some of them about Chris, or the Roaring Knight. So, like, there's too much going on with the Azrael is dead theory or Azrael's Dust theory to compact it all into one slot in the tier list. So this is specifically claiming nothing about what Azrael is, just that he is dead, that his body is no longer of the living. Not necessarily anything to do with his soul. Being dead does not mean your soul isn't still doing something, but Your original existence has come to an end. Azrael's dead. I'd say stonks are... I mean, it's either neutral or stonks slightly up. You could argue that every chapter that Azrael doesn't show up is further proof that he might be dead. So it's debatable. I'm gonna say stonks are slightly up. Every time like Azrael keeps getting brought up more and more, and I think it's every chapter he doesn't show up it is increasingly suspicious that he is absent. Because like from a narrative perspective, is Toby Fox really going to play it straight? Is he really going to be like, yeah, all this crazy stuff is happening, and Azrael, the most important character from Undertale, is just not involved. He's just irrelevant to Deltarune. Like, is that really what we're going to do? Is that really what he's going to say? I don't think so. I think if Azrael exists in this universe, then he matters in this universe. Even if he's not the most important character anymore, I think he still is going to be a important character. Or an important character, I should say. So, in that case, if everyone thinks... If he is important and he's not around, then I think there's a good chance that he died and his soul is now doing some shenanigans as some other entity. So yeah, I would say stonks are slightly up. I think narratively, it's slightly suggesting it. Now again, all of the stuff from stonks are slightly up to stonks are slightly down are debatable. Because a lot of these just don't get acknowledged at all in the chapter. And for those, you could say, oh, it wasn't acknowledged? That implies it's wrong. Or, oh, Azrael didn't show up? That could imply he is dead. But it's a matter of opinion. It's only with the other tiers that it gets a bit more concrete. But yeah, so I'd say slightly up, but really, there's nothing to say on that front. Ralsei is made from Azrael's dust. Stonks are slightly up. Maybe stonks are up. Ralsei continues to demonstrate more and more and more that he has Azrael's powers. He shoots fireballs. He prays, just like how Azrael is a very religious boy. The more like Azrael he behaves, the more likely it becomes that he is Azrael. He is based on Azrael's dust. Oh, and for those who don't know, this theory is that Azrael died. And when he died, his soul went off to do something else, but his body turned to dust. And his dust was used to create a darkener, and that darkener is Ralsei. This is the same mechanic that created the old man. It's just that instead it's Ralsei. Now, some people argue, but wait, in Deltarune Chapter 4, Ralsei says that darkeners like the old man can't appear in other darknesses, or are very unlikely to. And he speaks in vague terms. However, even if that were true, Azrael or Ralsei has already been established to be a special darkener. Certain rules just don't apply to him. And that could include the rules concerning, how Duskners work, aka darkeners made from monster dust. And that concept has been pushed harder and harder. I think the fact that Ralsei really doesn't get along with Flowery further pushes the envelope on him being Azrael to some extent, because Azrael hated what he was as Flowey in Undertale, so it makes sense Ralsei would feel antagonistic towards Flowery. And furthermore, most of the stuff, there's one line in particular that made me go, holy crap, stonks are up, which is when Flowery, Ralsei says, when it comes to defying fate, that, no one can do the impossible. And Flowery says the impossibility himself. Literally calling Ralsei an impossibility. And that's not something you say about a Darkener who isn't special. That's something you say about a Darkener who is very special. And a Darkener who does things that normal Darkeners shouldn't be able to do. Darkeners who have impossible attributes for a Darkener, but very logical dark attributes for a Duskner. Yeah, I think saying that he's an impossibility, that's not, I think that makes it very sus. If he was just a special Darkener, because another theory is that Rousey is just special because he's from the castle town, and that's it. But that, I don't think would warrant calling him an impossibility. But being a resurrected Duskner based on the dust of Azrael, that makes him closer to an impossibility. So I think stonks are up because of that. It's debatable if it's just stonks are slightly up, but nah, I think a lot of what Rousey says and does in this chapter just really makes me think he must be based on Azrael's dust. In fact, quite explicitly, because this chapter is all about alternate versions of Azrael. We've got Rousey, we've got Flowery, we've got potentially the Roaring Knight. There's a lot going on. And even at the very end of the chapter, when Flowery, gets his butt whooped by the Roaring Knight, one of the last things Rousey says is just to call Flowery an idiot. He just says the word idiot. Which is Flowey's go-to insult. And what is Flowey? An entity who is neither human nor monster, made from Azrael's dust. And Rousey is quoting him. I don't know about you, but if your character, it looks like Azrael, walks like Azrael, talks like Azrael, and quotes Flowey, that sounds a lot like he's based on Azrael's dust. So I'm saying its stonks are up. I think this theory has only gotten stronger. Next up, Rousey is a book or hard drive. This is one of my newer theories. This was before I did right before chapter 5 came out, I did a video that was just 30 super quick predictions that I didn't go super in depth with. They would have gotten their own videos if I'd had time, but I didn't have time. So I just gave the thesis statements on each theory and rushed through it. So that way my views on Deltarune would be known. And this was one of them. This is the theory. So Rousey is, and to be clear, some of these may seem contradictory, and they're not. All of these go together. So Rousey is made from Azrael's dust, and Rousey is a book or hard drive are not contradictory. They're supporting each other. It's the theory that Rousey is based on both Azrael's dust and a book or hard drive. But I've split them apart because, like I said, it's more efficient and succinct to look at the individual concepts. And this one is that, and why do I think Rousey is a book or hard drive? Because now, admittedly, there's some wiggle room for interpretation in this line, but in chapter 4, Rousey says something about how he has all this knowledge about how the world works, about the prophecy, about dark worlds, and he didn't ask to know these things, which I read at the time as him saying that he just has this knowledge without ever actively acquiring it. It's just something he was born with, he just knows these things without knowing why he knows these things. Admittedly, you don't have to read it that way. It could just be that, he didn't want to learn something, but he learned it on accident, he accidentally discovered the prophecy or whatever. You could read it that way, but personally, I read it as this is just innate knowledge, and that is a concept that has been established for Darkners, which is that the Darkners have two kinds of memories. Well, that's not entirely true, but basically, Darkners have two sets of information. There's information they have that's based on their history as a light world object, and there's the information they have based on what they are. For example, Tenna has memories of the Dreamer family because he's been sitting in their living room for years, and so he remembers a lot about them. That is his memories of the light world. However, there are also things he knows simply because he's a television. And, there's just certain things that are hard coded into him as a result of him being a television. A better example of this would be something like, say, what are those things called? The Bibliocs? They're the old men wizard characters who are basically books that have been brought to life. And, they can cast spells, and there's all these like ancient prophecies and secrets inside their pages. They don't necessarily understand the contents of their pages, and they don't have memories of learning about magic, per se, but they know these things anyway because it's just part of what they are as a book. So yeah, basically my theory is that, a lot of Rousey's information is just hard-coded into him as a result of him being a book or a hard drive filled with information about the Dark World, the Prophecy, Chris, Susie, Noelle, and so on. And this is a fine theory. I would say maybe stonks are slightly up, because there's a moment where, when looking at Asgore's notes, Rousey is dumbstruck. He's like, why don't I know this? Isn't this important? Which is not something I think someone would say if they had simply, naturally acquired knowledge. It sounds like something he would say if he knows that he himself, by his nature, is filled with all of the important information about the prophecy and destiny and, the Dark World, and yet seemingly Asgore's notes contained information he didn't know about. And that just sort of, like, that level of confidence that he knows everything that is important for the story feels like something that only someone who is hard-built with that knowledge would say. Now, this is all very vibes-based, and again, all of the stonks are slightly up to stonks are slightly down tiers are up for interpretation. But I would say there's a little bit, I'd say stonks are slightly up. I think there's a little bit of a hint there. I think there's a decent, and I'm just thinking of this right now, but I've since concluded that Azrael died while investigating what happened to December and the Dark Worlds and things like that. And if he was investigating such things, then he may have had a notebook that he was keeping his research notes in. And that notebook may have been Rousey. In fact, that would make sense because Rousey both knows things about the prophecy and knows things about the Dark World. And what was Azrael? Azrael was a very religious boy who, knew a lot about the prophecy because it's part of his religion. And he, was doing research into the Dark World. So this would actually make sense for Azrael in particular. But I digress. So yeah, I would say stonks are slightly up. I don't think it's a super acknowledged theory in this chapter, but there's potential there. Chris hated December. Yeah, I think this is one of my favorite theories because I think it's one that people's headcanons have gotten in the way of their interpretations so thoroughly that they've forgotten what the actual text supports. And this goes into stonks slightly up because we learned that from Asgore that he was worried that Chris would never have any other friend except Azrael. And he's saying that in the present day, meaning he did not consider any of the Holiday family to be friends of Chris, which totally adds up. Noelle has made it very clear, and she's probably closer to Chris than anyone in that family, and she's made it clear that she's not sure if they count as friends. And Noelle even explicitly has a line in one of the first chapters, maybe chapter 1, where she's like, oh, it's weird to see you talking to me or coming near my house, considering in the past you normally don't come here unless Azriel is also already coming here, suggesting Chris wasn't going there because they wanted to. Chris was going there because Azriel wanted to. And given the increasing evidence that, it's just explicitly confirmed that Azriel was very much into December. He has love letters to her and everything. If Azriel was Chris's only friend, and Azriel was starting to go for this girl and spend a lot of time at that girl's house, then it seems increasingly probable that Chris would get ditched in the lower floor to hang out with Noelle, while Azriel went up to December's room to hang out and, make music, both literally and perhaps metaphorically, given Burger Pants' reaction. Bro literally has a line being like, yeah, they didn't practice their music. Ugh. Which is like, what are you implying, Pizza Pants? So I think if Chris felt like they were losing their only friend to December, and it's established that Chris didn't like the holidays particularly, and there, all of that already is evidence in favor of this interpretation. And of course, there's the sword route in chapter 3, where you literally have Chris, independently of your control, kills a black deer. There seems to be increasing evidence that Chris had no fond memories of December holiday. And as far as chapter 5 exclusive content, the stuff from Asgore seems to paint Chris in a very dubious light. Chris's relationship with the holidays in a dubious light. So I would say stonks are slightly up. I wouldn't say it's necessarily stonks are up all the way, because it's just not super acknowledged. Saying Chris doesn't have any friends besides Azriel doesn't prove that Chris hated December. But it does add to that body of evidence. So yeah, stonks are slightly up on that one. The prophecy predicts all routes at once. One of the common beliefs in the community is that the weird route is breaking out of the prophecy. And I don't agree with that. I think the weird route is part of the prophecy. I think the prophecy in both games, and Undertale and Deltarune, is designed to be broad enough to accommodate all possible outcomes. So like in Undertale, it predicts an angel coming to the underground and, releasing all the monsters. But that can either mean, as Gerson himself puts it, that, a good angel will come and break the barrier and release monsters back to the surface, or that an evil angel will come down and kill them all. And both can be true. Both outcomes are accommodated for by the game and by the prophecy. And I think the same thing is happening in Deltarune. There are even unused prophecy panels about it's snowing, which seems to be a reference to Snowgrave. And the fact the prophecy uses super vague terms like love will find its way to the girl. It's like love can mean a ton of different things in this context. The girl can mean a ton of different things in this context. I think this is a extremely valid theory. As for how chapter 5 handled it, I'd say the normal route doesn't necessarily add anything of note to this. However, I think there's two arguments to be made for both stonks are slightly down and stonks are slightly up. For the stonks are slightly down option, you could say, well, at the end of the weird route, we skip basically the entirety of the Dark World of Chapter 5 and everything in Chapter 6. And some have argued that proves that it's not part of the prophecy anymore, because presumably the contents of Chapters 5 and 6 are part of the prophecy. However, that is an assumption. We don't actually know the details of the prophecy, and we only have gotten hints at it. So we don't actually know if anything in Chapter 6 is part of the prophecy. And even if it is, given how vague the prophecy is, it could still easily account for both the normal and weird routes. furthermore, the one piece of prophecy we have gotten that I think is relevant to chapter 5 and 6 is the one about the flower man in Asylum. And I think that is verbatim what it says. Let me pull it up on my phone. Yeah, the flower man trapped in Asylum. Yeah, that is perfectly vague. It shows both Asgore and Flowery in the prophecy panel. So it can be talking about either Asgore or Flowery. And Asylum can mean a ton of different things. In fact, you could argue that, because like, what do you do? What does it mean to seek asylum? It's like when someone gets exiled, when someone has to go find asylum somewhere else. It can also refer to a literal building, like an insane asylum. Like there's tons of different readings of it. Now, you could just argue that Asgore, as a kind of, fringe member, conspiracy theorist member of society, is in asylum because he's trapped inside his own interpretation or his own obsession with what happened in the past. So you could argue that that's not even referring to the events of chapter 5 specifically, and it's just referring to Asgore's, the arc of his life in general. So, that's an option. It can also be referring to Flowery, who's trapped in his glass cage, which is basically, trapped in asylum. So like it can be referring to Asgore's mind. It can be referring to Asgore getting kidnapped by the night. It can be referring to Flowery being stuck in his little cage, in his little dome, his little glass container. And if you don't even do the chapter 5 Dark World, then Flowery stays stuck in that container. So if Asgore doesn't go to the Dark World, then he stays stuck in his obsession. So stuck in asylum, trapped in asylum. So there's the only prophecy that's relevant to chapter 5, and it's not even necessarily conclusively relevant to chapter 5. And it can be read a ton of different ways that are all accounted for by the prophecy. So the main argument against Weird Route being evidence against it isn't particularly strong. By contrast, I think there's evidence in favor of it being true, particularly Ralsei, because Ralsei is aware that Chris is up to something, Chris is doing something dubious, and that Chris is acting in ways that Ralsei does not like. However, Ralsei does not go out of his way to stop Chris. And does not try to send Susie to stop Chris. And all of that suggests to me that the fact that Ralsei is aware of what Chris is up to, that it seems to imply, because Ralsei's knowledge is limited more or less to the prophecy and, the mechanics of the Dark World. So Ralsei being aware of shenanigans going on in the Light World that he couldn't possibly observe, as far as we know, suggests that he's just aware of it because of the prophecy, and therefore the Weird Route is part of the prophecy. So, yeah, I would say... Yeah, I think this can go in any of these tiers, depending on how you interpret things. I would say Ralsei kind of hints towards it being stonks up. I think the skipping of so much content could be read as saying stonks are slightly down. As such, I'll just put it in neutral. I think the prophecy can accommodate pretty much everything that's happening. So I don't think it goes either way. I think that's just a neutral. It's possible, but I don't think chapter 5 has much to say on this front. I will say, though, that Ralsei in this chapter, when discussing fate and destiny with Flowery, seems pretty, like, he describes leaving the destined prophecy route as impossible, which is not something I think someone would say. And he says that even if you abort the Weird Route, even if you've done all the crazy stuff in the Weird Route up to that point, he still says that it's impossible to cheat fate. So Ralsei seems pretty confident that whatever Chris is doing is still trapped within the prophecy. So that's just my opinion, though. I'd say the evidence does not strongly favor or disprove. DELTARUNE is the name of a planetary reset mechanism. Basically, in Rousey's prophecy, and he mentions how after the world has died, only then will the heroes find at world's edge, the angels' heaven, and in that image we see the heroes standing around a pillar of light containing the DELTARUNE emblem, which is to say the Delta Space Rune. However, the one-word DELTARUNE, I think, is a different thing entirely. I think the name DELTARUNE is referring to a literal plot element. It's not just the name of the game. I think one word Delta, I should clarify. I think DELTARUNE, when it's two words, is referring just to the emblem that we see that's everywhere in the game, in both games. However, with one word, I think it's referring to something specific. And I think it's referring to a mechanic that the soul, that the Earth has, where if all life, if the Earth itself dies, then I think it has a backup mechanic to reset the planet and restore life to the world. And I think that is what the DELTARUNE is. I think that reset mechanic is what is called DELTARUNE. Now, did that theory gain any evidence? No. I don't think this is a theory that gained or lost any proof. It's basically discussing a concept that's not going to be relevant until like the end of chapter 7. So, it's just not something that's come up. I think this is a very long, not, I don't know if long shot is the right word, but it's shooting off into the distance, this theory. So, it's predicting something from very far in the future. So it makes sense that there's not really any evidence for or against it yet in chapter 5. I like this idea, but I don't think it's relevant. I don't think it's been affected. Tied up to this theory, though, is DELTARUNE is a retelling of Noah's Ark. So another part of this theory is that that part of the reset mechanism to save the world is that Chris's soul, the red soul, will be used as an ark to carry forward, to basically be used as a seed to, restore life to the planet. And it works that way because the soul can contain multitudes. It can contain the hopes and dreams and memories and literal souls of other living creatures. And so I think part of the story is that the soul is an ark that will be used to restore life after the apocalypse. And all of this is very reminiscent of the story of Noah's Ark. In Noah's Ark, the world is consumed by a great flood, just as DELTARUNE will be consumed by a flood of darkness. The flood in Noah's Ark comes both from rain from the sky and from fountains that erupt from the earth. What do you know? DELTARUNE has both the threat from the sky in the form of the angel and the fountains erupting from the earth. Part of the reason the world gets flooded in Noah's Ark is because there are titans running around, giants, the Nephilim, as they were called. And what do you know? The roaring has giants in the form of the titans. There's even the song Raise Up Your Bat, which refers to some sort of your heart will be the ark that shines its way, which is pretty on the nose. So I think this theory has a lot of weight to it. Did anything add to it or subtract to it? I don't think anything subtracted to it, but I don't know if anything added to it either. Was there anything that was really oh my gosh, this is a retelling of Noah's Ark, or this is a Noah's Ark parallel? I don't recall. I don't think so. I might be missing some line, but even if so, it'd probably only get up to stonks are slightly up, but I think it's just neutral. Chris absorbed December's soul. Ooh, my most popular theory. Everyone loves this theory. Basically, this is the theory that we are playing as December in this game, and that much like how in Undertale, I think we're playing as Kara's ghost possessing Chris, or rather Frisk. Let me just re-say that sentence to be clear. I think in Undertale, Kara's ghost has been awakened from death by Frisk's determination upon landing on their grave, and then Kara haunts Frisk throughout the game and outright possesses them by the end of the game. I think in the bad route, Kara does that. In the normal route, I think Kara is just sort of observing the ongoings. However, I think that Kara effectively functions as the player character in that game. We are not Frisk. I think we are playing as Kara, and that's why we name Kara. And that's why we watch a flashback to Kara's life leading up to starting the game. So I think that in that game, and these games are parallels to one another, Undertale and Deltarune. So I think that in both games, we are playing as a deceased character whose spirit is still lingering for one reason or another. In Kara's case, their spirit had been resurrected from death as a demon, but in December's case, I think her soul is just outright absorbed by Chris. And I think the evidence for this is that Chris has a bunch of powers and abilities that no normal human has ever demonstrated, including Frisk. Just having the power to remove their soul and wander off without it is something Frisk never demonstrated the ability to do. The soul moving around during battle is not framed as being the soul leaving Frisk's body. Not in the way it's framed with Chris. And of course, Chris's soul can do things like shoot out beams of light. So I think Chris having all these powers suggests that they've definitely got a super soul, a soul that's more than just a normal human soul. And I think it's because they've absorbed a boss monster soul in the form of December. And thus we are playing as December. And the reason we name ourselves and stuff is because December's memory has been messed up. But anyway, point is, that's a separate theory. This is just the theory that we are playing as December, who has been absorbed by Chris. What evidence is there in favor? What evidence is there against it? Well, the weird route happens. So I think that's evidence against, or rather evidence in favor of the theory, because constantly there's just this question of why Noelle? Why is the weird route all about Noelle? Why is it about Noelle getting stronger? Why is it about Noelle breaking free? Like, you know, prior to Chapter 5, people could argue that the weird route is purely abusive to Noelle, and it purely exists to hurt Noelle and, you know, misuse her. That Noelle is just a tool of the evil soul's malevolent schemes. But I don't think that logic works anymore once we reach Chapter 5. I think by the time we reach Chapter 5, it's made clear that whether their logic is ethical or not, the point of the weird route is to liberate Noelle. To liberate her from having to be Noelle anymore. To liberate her from ethics, and to just make Noelle stronger. And Noelle loves it. She is hilariously down for this plan. And it's amazing. And, you know, I haven't really talked about it in a video yet, but basically, the weird route in Chapter 5 is the best thing Toby Fox has ever written. It's the best thing I've ever seen. It is so impactful emotionally. It is a masterpiece. I love it. And it instantly elevated Noelle from being a character I felt kind of neutral about to being my favorite character. Noelle in the weird route is so compelling, it's not even funny. But I digress. Point is, I think the fact that the weird route is so oriented around Noelle hints that it makes more sense if we are playing as December, because December would have a vested interest in Noelle. And in seeing her succeed and be successful and gain power and gain freedom and all these things. And furthermore, Noelle herself says that ever since December left, she's felt like she's been watching her life through a screen. Basically saying she hasn't really felt alive since December left. And that has only changed since the weird route started happening. Which sounds an awful lot like saying Des left, her life got crap, and then we came back, Des came back, and now she's feeling alive again. I think narratively there's a bit of a loop being set up there, of a cycle reaching its natural conclusion, and I think there's certainly some hints that this is increasingly true. Now, what else is there as far as evidence goes for this theory? It's mostly just the weird route stuff. I would say that the fact that it is increasingly shoved in our face that Chris flirts with everyone, even though Noelle finds that fact baffling, is further evidence that December is the character we're playing as, because Chris has no friends. We've established this. Azriel was Chris's only friend, which seems to run counterintuitive to the idea that Chris is this massive flirt. Like, the narrative 99% of the time says Chris is an antisocial, weird little goblin creature who is not a flirt. And yet, in the game, throughout the time that Susie has known Chris, they've been massively flirty when it came to the Dark World and interacting with enemies. And what do you know? All the times that we're interacting with enemies and flirting is when we are in control. And the fact that that line gets said, even if you haven't intentionally flirted with anyone, suggests that this is just an inbuilt part of the narrative. It's something Toby Fox wants to bring attention to no matter what, which suggests to me that this is further evidence of December being the soul. Because basically, that's like, I mean, it's never been stated outright that December was a huge flirt, but it matches up with her characterization. And it doesn't match up with Chris's characterization. And as you'll know from my Azriel is Dust theory 1.0, part of the reason that theory fell apart is because Azriel is not a flirt. Azriel is this, son, preacher's son, not literally, but like he's an innocent little church boy whose mother flipped out when he kissed, was it Caddy or Bratty? One of them. I don't buy the idea that Azriel is a flirt, and I think Chris has to be possessed by either Azriel or December, because they're the only two boss monsters that, I should have probably included on this list that I think December is a boss monster. Oh well. It's implied, because only boss monster souls last long enough to be absorbed. And yeah, so if it's Azriel or December that's possessing Chris, Azriel is not really a flirt, whereas it is absolutely in the cards for December to be a flirt. So, yeah, I think it makes sense for to characterize her in that way. So I would put I would put it in one of these spots. Yeah, I'd say stunk just slightly up. I think the weird route existing and Chris continually being characterized with this flirtatious element suggests that December's soul has been possessing them. Again, you can disagree with whether the evidence supports or disproves it, whatever, but I personally think it's only gotten more credence. So yeah. Oh, and I guess I should clarify again. I think this will be the last time I clarify this. I think anyone who's still misunderstanding my Azrael's Dust 2.0 theory is misunderstanding it willfully. I don't view the weird route as being romantic. So I do not think this theory actively implies anything romantic is occurring between December and Noelle. I just don't. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that that's territory Toby Fox is incapable of exploring. I mean, prior to Chapter 5, I don't think anyone could have predicted Noelle doing all the stuff she does in Chapter 5, Weird Route. So I think Toby Fox is capable of writing very dark topics that no one else, that a lot of the fan base does not seem aware that he is capable of putting in this game. But I don't actually think that a December-Noelle relationship, some sort of toxic taboo relationship, is something that he's going to be exploring in this game. personally. I don't think that's going to happen. I could be wrong, but I don't think that's going to happen, and that happening is not part of my theory whatsoever. And that will be the last time I clarify that, because I think anyone's still saying such things. It's just being intentionally antagonistic. December's memories have been eroded. Okay, so this is the theory that... So part of the arguments against this theory is that some of December's behavior as the soul seems a little strange for a character who should know things like December knows. Like when you first read, or like you can see a picture of Rudy in chapter 1, and the narrator describes it as, you see a reindeer-looking monster, which is a weird way for December to refer to her father. However, counterpoint. One, we don't really know who the narrator is in Deltarune. In fact, a theory I came up with while watching the Weird Route is that Chris is the narrator. And Chris, being so callous and oblivious to things like anyone in the Holiday family, actually seems in line with their character. But regardless, the point is that it does seem strange that there are certain bits of information that December should know, and even the fact that we name ourselves something different at the start of the game seems strange if we are an established character with an established name. Which has led me to conclude that memories are damaged in the Dark World. I think darkness itself is eroding one's memories over time, and the longer you're exposed to it, the more your memories get erased. They get burned. They get just sort of dissolve over time, and I think that's why Don't Forget is a big part of this game's themes, and memories are a big part of the themes, and I think that's a big part of it. So, is there any evidence that December specifically's memories have been eroded as a result of the events of Deltarune? I'd say stonks are slightly up on this one, precisely because when you start the chapter, if you go and look at the love letters to December, the narration, which I think is heavily implied to be Chris, to be honest, basically is like, are we really going to read these love letters that we have already read? However, we as the player have no memory of reading them, which suggests that Chris and the soul have read these before, but have since forgotten that they've read these, or at least the soul has. So that's evidence of memory loss. And when Chris looks in the mirror, the narration says, you look away, who is that? In the past chapters, it said things like, it's you, or it's what they call you. Now it's just saying, who is that? That is implying memory loss. Or, and you could say, oh, but it's really just commenting on identity fracture, like Chris is losing track of themselves, etc. But whether that's being framed as Chris not recognizing themselves or the soul not recognizing Chris, either way, it's a lack of recognition that was there in the past. And that seems to imply these memories getting eroded. So I would say stonks are slightly up on this. I think there's evidence in favor of it. The Weird Route is not about romance. I guess I made this its own whole theory. I think this goes into stonks are up, actually. I mean, you can read the Chapter 5 Weird Route through a romantic lens, but I don't. And I think what the Chapter 5 stuff proves definitively is that it was never about romance. There was a bond being forged between between the soul and Noelle, but that bond was not about anything romantic. It was about freedom and defying fate and escaping this town and escaping in general. And in fact, I think the characterization of Noelle in the Weird Route of Chapter 5 really hammers home that her relationship with Chris has nothing to do with romance, because she seems exclusively into Susie. The way she treats Susie in the Weird Route and the way she treats Noelle are or the way she treats Chris are night and day. And I think that's hammering home that Noelle has romantic feelings for Susie. What she has with Chris in the Weird Route is a different beast entirely. So yeah, I think stonks are super up. Perhaps the only thing that could be even read as vaguely romantic is that they hold hands at one point. And I don't know, I find everything about that route to be extremely, it's a lot of things. Romantic, I don't think, is one of them. A lot of the symbolism used that in previous chapters that were debatable on their romance levels are ditched entirely in the Weird Route of Chapter 5. So I think the stonks are up on this one. It's not necessarily confirmed, but stonks are up. Hope is Deltarune's core mechanic. Stonks are up on this one. This is another theory that I feel has would have aged better if I'd been a little more vague. Like if instead of saying hope is Deltarune's core mechanic, I just said hopes and dreams, then this would just be confirmed. But since it's specifically hope is Deltarune's core mechanic, I think hope is important. I think it's a key part of it. It's explicitly stated that Flowery is as powerful as he is because he's powered by hope. So it's certainly making it clear that hope is a key element. But I wouldn't say it's explicitly confirmed per se. It's just one of the most important things. I would say this theory is confirmed when it's made clear that the power being referenced at save points is the power of hope. As it stands, I would say hope is, there's a lot of evidence for hope being the game's main mechanic, but I don't think it's explicitly confirmed just yet. Chris is working with the mayor. I mean, this is pretty, I think this is true, but is there evidence supporting this theory? I don't think, I would say stonks are slightly up. Evidence supporting this theory in Chapter 5, to be clear. I would say evidence is slightly up because it's very convenient that the mayor calls Noelle away immediately before Chris creates a dark world for Susie to go into. I think that's a little too convenient to be a coincidence. As for anything else in this chapter, I don't think anything else is too explicit. I don't think there's much else going on that explicitly ties Chris and the mayor. I think that content was mostly fleshed out in Chapter 4. Chapter 4 basically made this canon, but I don't know. Even if this was just based on Chapter 4, I still wouldn't put it in Apollo Blesses Me because I think it's still stonks are up. But in Chapter 5, I'd say it's only stonks are slightly up. It's vaguely hinted at, but I don't think it's explicit. But yeah, December is dead. Yeah, this is the theory that December is dead. She's still not around. Everyone frames it as she's gone. Noelle frames it as December left. But I think the entirety of Asgore's story seems to be, it's never explicitly stated, but I'm pretty sure the tragic event was the death of December. So I would say this goes in stonks just slightly up. Not confirmed by any stretch, but definitely stonks are slightly up. Asriel is the Roaring Knight. So the way this works in with all my other theories is that after Asriel died, and I think he died in the shelter, his dust became Ralsei, but his soul was absorbed by a Titan spawn and became the Roaring Knight. Now, admittedly, the whole Titan spawn thing, that's a separate theory. This is just Asriel's the Roaring Knight. What evidence is there that Asriel's the Roaring Knight? in Chapter 5, the Roaring Knight is not really a present entity. However, I think the structure of the narrative supports this theory slightly. Now, why do I say that? Well, how does Chapter 5 end? It ends with Flowery fighting the Roaring Knight. Now, right now, we don't know who the Roaring Knight is, but eventually we will know. And when we do, that will recontextualize the fight between Flowery and the Knight. Which, if I was writing it, I would want, like, if I'm going to go out of my way to have a Darkner, who isn't one of our main characters, get a whole crazy cool fight scene against the Roaring Knight, I would want that to happen with some sort of interesting thematic connection between Flowery and the Knight. Now, if the Knight is December or Rudy or Asgore, well, it's not Asgore, but if it was Rudy or December, then that reveal wouldn't make the fight with Flowery any more interesting, because those characters have nothing to do with Flowey. But if it's Asriel, then having him fight Flowery is super freaking cool, because that means that that fight is a fight between an alternate universe good version of Flowey and an alternate universe evil version of Asriel. And that's just Pog. That is Pog champ. That is cool as hell. And I think that the structure of the narrative and Toby Fox's clear awareness of what would make this fight thematically cool supports the notion that this is Asriel. It's a slight thing. I'm not going to pretend it stunks her up, but it's a slight thing. And now you could argue, well, Flowery is kind of a callback to the main antagonist of Undertale. So having the main antagonist of Undertale fight the main antagonist of Deltarune is just some cool fan service. And that could be true. But I still think it would mainly be interesting if it was Asriel. And I think Toby Fox knows that. That said, there is a slight bit more evidence connecting Asriel and the Roaring Knight in Chapter 5. And that mostly comes from... what was it? Their poses. We get some posing from Asriel, or rather the Roaring Knight and Flowery, that are extremely similar. I'll try to remember to edit it on screen, but basically after the battle with Flowery, he's in this kneeling position with his head downcast, and then he turns his head up. And that is almost identical to the pose that the Roaring Knight takes after crashing into the wall and then looking up at Flowery. They are almost identical. And then when they're clashing, they strike similar poses as well. So, again, very slight evidence, but I would say it is evidence nonetheless. Now, with that said, there is a detail that I do not consider evidence against this theory, but other people have interpreted it this way. When reading Asgore's notes, Susie interprets it as suggesting that the Roaring Knight has been around for years and has been creating dark fountains and kidnapping people all that time. And she deduces that based on the fractured interpretation of Asgore's notes that Rousey provides. However, I think that is the most explicit red herring of all time. Not even just in Toby Fox's work. Like, it's so explicitly trying to trick us. They take a pile of Asgore's notes, jumble them up so we don't know what they say, have Rousey interpret them, and Rousey explicitly says he's really struggling. He's saying he can't really tell what it's saying. So that's already adding an asterisk to his interpretation. And then it's filtered through Susie. And Susie is the audience surrogate. She is there to be drip-fed the plot. She is there to not understand anything, so that way the characters have someone to exposition at. Like, for people who haven't been paying attention to the deep lore, who haven't been super invested in the theories, Toby Fox still needs to drip feed these concepts to them. And that is Susie's role. She is there to be the big dunderhead who doesn't understand the plot. So that way, so Toby Fox can explain the plot to someone. And that is explicitly her role in the sequence. And the fact that it's jumbled notes that Ralsei cannot understand that are then being reinterpreted by Susie, and only then do we reach the conclusion that, oh, maybe the Roaring Knight's been around since the desk disappeared. It's like, brother, you have to jump through so many hoops for that to be evidence. And it's not good evidence. I discussed it at length during my blind playthrough, but to TLDR, this is not evidence. And in fact, I think when you read between the lines and actually consider what it is being said, all that we know is that a dark fountain was created in the shelter a long time ago. And it was during that incident when, in all likelihood, December disappeared. And it was in that incident that Asgore found a black shard. Nope, that's not true. I'm misremembering. It is not said that Asgore found that shard at the time. It just says that he found that shard at the scene. And the note saying that he found it at the scene was written a day ago. And you know what happened a day ago? A day ago, Asgore was hanging out near the shelter investigating. Or it's implied that he was, because after we leave church, we see him emerging from the south, from the direction of the shelter, to say, give flowers to Toriel, etc. And then when we follow Asgore and go to the mayor's house, we hear him talking about that black shard and marveling at its beauty for the first time. And, if he's had this shard for years, it almost seems a bit strange for him to be musing out loud how pretty it is. So I personally think that what actually happened is Asgore's writing a note about how yesterday he found the black shard down by the shelter. And it also, unrelated, is saying that he believes that the shelter Dark Fountain and the cyber world Dark Fountain were created by the same person. Susie interprets that to mean that the Roaring Knight created both fountains. However, Asgore's out of the loop, Susie's out of the loop, and I'm pretty sure all of this is wrong. I'm pretty sure what actually happened is that Chris created the Dark Fountain in the shelter, or at the very least, Chris was present when it happened. And that was when December died. And then later on, the Knight created the cyber world. However, I think Asgore is assuming there is only one person creating dark fountains, but we know for a fact that isn't true. We've seen Susie create dark fountains, we've seen Chris create dark fountains, and we've seen the Roaring Knight create dark fountains. That's at minimum 3 characters creating dark fountains. So Asgore is already wrong to assume that there's only one entity creating dark fountains. So attributing all of them to the Knight is a mistake on both his part and a mistake on Susie's part. She's not aware Chris is creating some of these, so she's not factoring that in. So yeah, I do not think that that note is hard evidence even slightly. In fact, I think the fact that it's being drip-fed through Susie's interpretation after being all jumbled is actually evidence in the opposite direction. I think that is super red flag. I think that is a super strong piece of evidence saying that what we're looking at is not what they think it is. And I think that is confirmed that Susie's interpretation is wrong by Ralsei's reaction. Because when confronted with the possibility of the Knight being around for years, Ralsei's like, that doesn't make sense. The Knight shows up when the heroes enter the Dark World for the first time. That is when the Knight becomes an active figure. Prior to that, they are not an active role. And Ralsei knows what he's talking about. If you're giving me two options, Ralsei knowing what's going on, or Susie's interpretation of Ralsei's jumbled reading of Asgore's confused notes being the truth, I'm going with Ralsei. I think Ralsei knows better. And Ralsei is clearly like, this doesn't make sense. If this was true, I would know about it. He's questioning himself a little, and he leaves it as a question to kind of continue misleading people, but I'm like 99% certain this is all a massive red herring. I know people make fun of me and be like, oh, all evidence against your theories is a red herring. Ooh, confirmation bias. But this is the most explicit manipulation ever. Even if you disagree with all my other theories, you have to admit, this is pretty manipulative. This is a bit of dialogue and exposition that feels custom designed to lead people down the primrose path. So I don't think that evidence disproves Azrael's the Night. In fact, I think it being so suspicious and so misleading and so explicitly misleading only makes me think I'm right. In fact, I think it's designed to make people further believe in December Roaring Night theory, which only makes me further think that's not the truth. So, out of respect for the fact that the game itself is trying to trick us, I'll put this in neutral. But in my heart, it's in stonks slightly up. But I'm pretty sure that's a massive red herring on Toby Fox's part. Deltarune takes place before Undertale. Stonks are up, baby. Why? Because Sans gets the postcard, or the punch card, that has a crudely drawn picture of 3 smiling people with the phrase, "Don't forget" on it. Sans has that in Undertale. He gets it in Deltarune. This is stonks are up. I think at this point, because some people, up until now, there still is, this isn't going to Apollo blesses me, but up till now, there's been debate on whether Undertale took place before or after Deltarune, and whether Sans, most people agree they're in separate universes, but the debate is whether Sans came to Deltarune after the events of Undertale, or if Sans left Deltarune to go to Undertale after the events of Deltarune. And I think this is supporting the theory that Deltarune takes place before Undertale pretty comfortably. In fact, it's really funny because we'll get to this when we get to my Gaster theories, which are down here. But I am 100% confident there are 2 Gasters. There's the Undertale Gaster and the Deltarune Gaster. And I'm also 100% confident that the Gaster we're dealing with in the plot is Undertale Gaster. 100% confident. But some people think that we're dealing with Deltarune Gaster, which I find really funny. I'm almost certain that we're dealing with Undertale Gaster, and I think the fact that Undertale Gaster is the main Gaster doing shenanigans in this plot is the reason that Sans will end up going to Undertale. I think that is the reason. In fact, I'm pretty sure he's going to go to Undertale and murder Gaster. But, so yeah, I think this is very much going in stonks are up. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm getting into other theories, but Deltarune, I think taking place before Undertale is super boosted by that Sans scene. The Night is a fusion of a monster soul and a Titan spawn. This is evidence that I think has only gotten stronger with time. The Night is able to appear in both the Light World and the Dark World once again and successfully kidnaps Asgore, suggesting that they are both if it was a pure Darkner, it shouldn't be able to operate in the Light World. So that means there has to be a Lightner component to this entity, which, further evidence in favor of this theory. And the Night low diffs, to use a versus debate term, Flowery. And Flowery is not weak. Flowery is remarkably powerful. Flowery uses everything to his advantage and gets obliterated. That suggests to me that the Knight has to have something more potent than just being a Darkner. It has to have powers beyond the Pale, which I think only makes sense if it is a combination of a bunch of different types of entities in one nightmarish antagonist. So I think the fact that, the Knight low diffs, flowery, and can go into the light world in order to kidnap Asgore all supports the idea that the Knight is a fusion of a monster soul and a Titan spawn. Specifically, Azrael. Where is it? Azrael is the word. Oh, yeah. Specifically Azrael, but regardless of who it is, I think it's pretty clear that the Knight is not just... Oh, and of course, it didn't happen... Oh, wait, the Knight created a second Dark Fountain that we had to seal. Again, and they did it after we sealed the first one. Because if they had done it before we sealed the first Flower Kingdom Dark Fountain, then it would have created a Titan. We know how this works. So the fact that the Knight could not have made that second fountain before we sealed the first one. So like they made the second one in the split second after Chris, or during the time Chris was sealing the first fountain. So that proved, we already knew they could create dark fountains thanks to chapter 4, but now we know they can create dark fountains in the light world. So that suggests that they pretty strongly suggest the Knight is, at least in part, a monster soul. So stonks are definitely up for that one, or at least slightly up. I think the part of it being a Titan spawn isn't necessarily confirmed enough for me to bump it up into stonks are up tier, but it can definitely go here. Azrael is the speaker in the unused text hidden in the code. There is new unused text. Basically, this theory holds that after Azrael died and his soul was absorbed by the Titan spawn, his perception of reality has basically just been darkness. He doesn't know if he's alive or dead. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know what's real anymore. And all of that makes sense if his heart has been literally trapped in darkness. And yeah, I think most people will agree with me that whoever is speaking in the code, it has to be either Azrael or December, as is usual. It technically doesn't have to, but I think it'd be kind of weird to give so much attention to a character who isn't one of the main cast. So I'm pretty sure this is Azrael. I think this is the soul within the Roaring Knight. Regardless of who you think that soul is, I think it's the soul. There is new text in this chapter, but it doesn't really add anything in favor of it being Azrael. It just talks about how, all they are now is really just memories, and that the only real thing they can do is make sure they don't forget, which is a cool thematic reference to the main theme of the game, and adds further credence to my theory about darkness, eroding memories. But it doesn't necessarily prove that the speaker is Azrael. I think past chapters gave stonks are up to it, particularly the one where it depicts Azrael, or the speaker, as being kind of a crybaby, which is consistent with Azrael's characterization. However, in this chapter, they're pretty stoic, relatively speaking, so I wouldn't say it proves anything. I think this is a neutral theory in this chapter. Carol's main goal is to resurrect December. We don't really learn anything more about Carol in this chapter, so I'm just going to leave this here. I think she knows that December is possessing Chris. I think her goal is to resurrect December, and I even have a theory about how she plans to do that. But that is a theory that hasn't been released yet, so I will not be discussing it here. However, regardless, I do not think this theory got much attention in Chapter 5. Chris's main goal is to resurrect Azrael. This continues to be what I think Chris's main goal is. I think they're trying to rescue the Knight from their state and restore Azrael to life. However, as far as proving that theory, we don't really get any insight into Chris's motivations. They are clearly wearing themselves thin at the start of chapter 5. Like, they crawl in through the window, like, looking like a corpse. And that implies that they were out there working their butts off into the wee hours of the morning, desperately, collaborating with Carol or whatever in the Roaring Night in order to achieve their mysterious goals. And I don't think Chris would be pushing himself to near death trying to achieve a goal that isn't extremely important to them. And what do we learn in this chapter? That Chris's only friend was Azrael. I'm actually putting that in stonks for slightly up. The fact that it's made clear that Chris's only friend is Azrael prior to the events of Deltarune, this definitely goes in stonks for slightly up, because they're clearly not doing this to help Toriel or Asgore, which are their other two most important people in their lives, or in their life. In Chris's life. But that just leaves the only other character who's not in the picture is Azrael. And so the only thing that makes sense is that Chris's main motivation is Azrael related. So yeah, I think this goes into songs just slightly up. Chris is the Deltarune version of Frisk. This is a theory that I've been back and forth on. Because obviously there's a lot of stuff going on with Chris that's a lot darker, a lot edgier, a lot more antagonistic than Frisk ever was. However, Frisk was also a much younger child. They weren't as jaded, they weren't as, traumatized. They didn't have as much drama going on as Chris does. So them acting all edgy and stuff doesn't really prove that they aren't Frisk. It just proves that they're a teenager going through some dark stuff. So how do we feel on that front? I don't think Chris is Kara, personally. I think they may fill a thematic role in the story that is, a thematic parallel to Kara, but I don't think they are Kara. I don't think they're the Deltarune version of Kara. There's too many things inconsistent with that reading for me to necessarily buy it. There's an argument for it, to be certain. However, I don't think Chris is like Kara. Kara actively hated humanity. And while Chris certainly doesn't seem to be a huge fan, they're not, actively seeking the obliteration of humankind. So I don't think that quite lines up. And furthermore, and this is something I've been thinking about, and this isn't going to affect my ranking. This goes in neutral. I don't think anything's really affected my opinion in this chapter of this topic. I mean, I guess you could argue that there being a parallel to Flowey and a parallel to the human souls, it would make sense that Chris, as the entity who defeats Flowery, is paralleling Frisk, therefore, and so you could argue for stonks are slightly up. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it in neutral. Now, I did have a line of thought, though, that I think is interesting, and I want to briefly touch on, which is that Toby Fox seems to be a pacifist. He seems to really believe in pacifism, just like me. And, my love for pacifism, my belief in pacifism is a big part of why I fell in love with Undertale as hard as I did, because it very much felt like this story was written by a kindred spirit, someone who really understood the importance of pacifism. And something that you think about a lot as a pacifist is the reality that people, because one of the main arguments against pacifism is that there's bad people who do bad things, and we gotta stop them with lethal force. Ethically, I'm opposed to that because I don't think people are fundamentally evil. I think people are fundamentally, good or neutral, and I don't think anyone is born villainous. I think that people, through trauma and life circumstances and things that are outside their control, are molded into being individuals with problematic behavior that puts them at odds with society. As a pacifist, that doesn't mean I think such people should be allowed to roam free. I think those people are a threat to themselves and others and need to be contained. But I think such people should be treated with empathy and sympathy and kindness, because no one chooses to be a unethical, traumatic, tragedy. No one chooses to go down that path. That's just something that's done to people. And I think non-pacifists tend to overemphasize the importance of free will. Some people pretend that free will is everything. That everyone is good because they chose to be good, or bad because they chose to be bad. And I think that's ridiculous. I think you could take the worst person in history and put them in a different context with different upbringing, and they could end up being one of the best people in history. And, some people will be like, oh, but what about how Steve and Bill both grew up? I just made up Steve and Bill. They're not real people. They both grew up in terrible conditions and surrounded by crime and poverty and all this stuff. But Steve pulled himself up by his bootstraps and went on to be a successful and respected member of society. But Bill became a lifelong criminal. Therefore, it's free will. Bill was a bad person and chose to be bad, whereas Steve was a good person and chose to lift himself up. And I think that's ridiculous. Just because two people have superficially similar lives doesn't mean they had the same life. It doesn't mean they have the same personalities. There's an infinite number of tiny elements that contribute to who you are, and your free will is only one of those elements. Steve and Bill had drastically different parentage, drastically different genetics, drastically different friends, enemies, social encounters. There are 1,000 things that could have shaped Steve and Bill's lives down different paths. And yes, free will exists, I believe, but I don't think it is this all-encompassing powerhouse that people think it is. I think your life circumstances narrow the scope of the kind of person you could even choose to be. So the point is, I think that our attitude towards the criminal, problematic members of society should be one of pity, not one of hatred. It should be one of, wow, it is unfortunate that they were dealt a hand that molded them into this kind of person. So I think they should be treated with empathy and pity and be, contained if needed, but they should be given help too. They should be given the chance to heal and grow and rehabilitate themselves, because they're still human. Being problematic, being molded into a damaged individual doesn't make you inhuman. It doesn't make you a demon. You are still human and deserve empathy and kindness and support, especially because so much of who and what you are is outside your control. Sorry to get off on a bit of a soapbox, but this has a point I'm getting to, which is that it could. I've often thought about these things, so it's quite possible Toby Fox has too, as a fellow pacifist, and that could be the point of Chris, is to show that even though they are the same person as Frisk, at least on a genetic level, their life and upbringing has been radically different. And because of that, Chris has been molded into a much more dangerous individual. They've become a much more damaged individual, much more troubled and mentally ill individual. And as a result, the same entity in one timeline is the savior of the universe, savior of all monster kind, and in another timeline is on the verge of bringing about the annihilation of the world. So, the idea, I'm not saying this proves anything, but if it turned out Chris is this universal version of Frisk, then it would be thematically resonant with pacifist philosophy by showing that the circumstances of one's birth mold you to an enormous degree. And even if, at your core, you're a decent person, like when you're born, I think everyone's a decent person. If your life circumstances are unpleasant, tragic, etc., you can be molded into a monster. Well, I say that. I don't like calling people monsters. That's dehumanizing. It can mold you into a damaged individual who doesn't behave ethically. And it would be thematically resonant for Toby Fox to utilize Chris as a counterpoint to Frisk, to show that, both characters deserve our respect and our love and our empathy, even if one of them is very problematic, because at the end of the day, they didn't choose the life they were given. And the life they were given played a big role in deciding who they are. Free will is limited. Free will is confined. Free will can only do so much. And the rest is beyond our control. So a huge tangent, I'll admit, but it served a point, which was to show that it would be thematically resonant for this theory to be true, and it would serve to push the pacifist philosophy of Toby Fox even further and push it into even deeper territory, which I would appreciate. I'm not going to say that this enormous hypothetical based on the assumption of shared worldviews between me and Toby Fox has anything approaching the equivalent of evidence backing it up, but I just wanted to kind of go down that path and discuss why. I don't know. I thought it was an interesting perspective to share, because I doubt anyone else has said it before in a video, so I thought I'd say it. Anyway, Toriel knows Chris got Des killed and is covering for them. This is mainly fueled by the Black Deer conspiracy theory. The Black Deer theory, whatever. It's a video about the sword route and how you kill a black deer in it, and it's all tied up with a variable called the Toriel variable. And, it's a cool theory. I like it. Does it get any evidence supporting it in this chapter? Debatable. I don't think so. Nothing hard. Now, I would argue that it becomes there's a lot of dramatic irony that is introduced this chapter with regards to this theory because of Asgore's story. The fact that if it was revealed that this is true, then that would mean part of the reason she was so opposed to him researching this and investigating this and obsessing over this was because she already knew the truth and knew that if he kept going down this path, he would get their child. He could potentially ruin the life of their child in the form of Chris. And so it was very ironic that it would be very much the kind of cruel trick that the universe would play on Asgore to have them succeed in their mission only to destroy their family even more, or destroy his family even more. So it would be, I think the dramatic irony would certainly lift this up perhaps a little. I don't know if it counts as stonks slightly up. I think it's just because there's the potential for very juicy dramatic irony doesn't prove anything. I don't know. This one's debatable. I'm tempted to put it in stonks or slightly up, but Toriel's such a non-character in the story that I don't know if I should. I'm going to put it in neutral, but dramatic irony certainly makes me think it's more true. So yeah. Chris will lose the red soul. This is the theory that Chris will lose the red soul at some point. The soul will move on from them. That someone else will absorb it, and that'll be the end of that. Basically, will control a different character instead of Chris. There's certainly evidence for it, but I don't know if there's a ton of evidence in Chapter 5 specifically. You could argue the weird route shows the soul. I don't know. I'm putting this in neutral. I don't think any evidence necessarily strongly or even weakly supports this theory in Chapter 5. I still think it has a good shot of being true, but I don't think Chapter 5 added much to it. Deltarune's save system is soul-based time travel. This is the theory that Deltarune's time save mechanic is different from Undertale's. In Undertale, the save system, it's presented like it's time travel, but it's actually reality warping. You are rewriting reality itself and rewriting it in such a way that it goes back to a previous state. But because it's not true time travel, people have deja vu because you erased their memories instead of going back in time. But in Deltarune, there is no deja vu, which suggests to me that you're not rewriting reality the way you did in Undertale. Furthermore, Deltarune's heavily focused on the idea that we lack control and we lack power and agency, which contradicts the whole point of determination, which is to have agency. So I don't think we have power over the timeline in this universe, which means there has to be a different mechanic underpinning our saving and loading capabilities. With that in mind, my theory is that thanks to Chris's soul being special and having absorbed a monster soul, it gains access to a unique power, which is the ability to shift its consciousness forward or backwards in its own timeline. It's not physical time travel, it's not Back to the Future. Rather, instead, it's more akin to something like Kingdom Hearts time travel, where you can send yourself spiritually through time, but you can't send yourself physically. Or to use another example that is also kind of niche, there was that one X-Men movie where they send Wolverine back in time, but they do it by sending the consciousness of future Wolverine back into the body of Wolverine from the past. So I think that's remarkably similar to how I think the same mechanic works in Deltarune, which is that you can't actually physically time travel and you don't control the timeline, but you can move your consciousness forward or backwards to any point in the timeline that you have access to. This also plays into my theory that memory loss is affecting December, because you could argue, oh, why can't we go to a future chapter? Well, it's because we've forgotten it for the moment. Our memories are really terrible, and we only remember things we've done recently. So yeah, I think this is just a nifty little explanation for how we have the save system, but also it functions differently in this universe. Did this theory gain any proof in this chapter? No, I don't think so. I think this is neutral. Susie inherits the red soul in the normal route. This is basically saying that after Chris loses the red soul, it will be absorbed by Susie, or at least she will carry it for a time. I don't think this is something that's meaningfully acknowledged in this route, or in this chapter. So Noelle inherits the red soul in the weird route. This is either in stonks are up or stonks are slightly up. I'm putting it in stonks are up. I think they both there's a good chance that one or both of them died and their soul was absorbed by the other during the events of the weird route in chapter 5. Now, it's not guaranteed. I think a lot of people are leaping to conclusions assuming they're both dead, especially because there's a lot of evidence suggesting that there's some link between the lake and the underground shelter. So there's a good possibility that both of them are still alive, and just ended up in the underground. However, either way, I think that the increased link between the soul and Noelle, and her increased desire to continue to be controlled by the soul, only add further credence to this theory. So yeah, stonks are definitely up on that one. Shadow crystals are made of hope. Oh, my sweet summer child. This one goes all the way down into stonks are down. I won't say it's completely debunked, but it is in stonks are down. Basically, Sham explicitly states that that shadow crystals contain the power of the will. Wait, no, actually, they contain something closer to lost dreams, I think he said. Now, the reason I'm putting it into stonks are down instead of debunked, if he had said shadow crystals are made of lost dreams, I'd put it in debunked. But he phrases it as they contain the power of lost dreams. So it doesn't exclude the possibility that they are composed to some extent of hope. They're clearly primarily a dreams thing, not a hope thing. But it's not completely impossible that hope plays a role. And if you think about it, aren't hopes and dreams intimately interconnected? Isn't a dream something you hope will happen? You know? So I would say it's still possible for this theory to be true. It's just not very likely. I think it took a big hit this chapter. Rest in peace. Deltarune is stuck in a time loop. Yeah, basically I just think that Deltarune... This is a theory that I've had evolving feelings on after chapter 5. Not necessarily because I think it got contradicted in any way. In fact, I think the increasing like emphasis on the idea that we're stuck and that, like Noelle said, nothing changed. Like the increasing emphasis on the idea that we are trapped in this destiny feeds in thematically to this theory, even if it doesn't explicitly confirm it in a mechanical sense. But the way Ralsei talks about how impossible it is to change destiny, that he doesn't talk about it like someone who's just aware of the nature of the universe. He talks about like someone who is intimately aware of how this is all played out before, and it's never changed, and it probably never will. So like there's certainly some interpretation in favor of it. I'm just a little where that I feel a little iffy on this is just because of my other theory. Where is it? Planetary reset. Here it is. I'm debating if the planetary reset mechanism in Deltarune is also the time loop. It would be convenient if these two theories were referring to the same thing and that the Deltarune literally resets time. But it would also make sense for these to be unrelated. Because why would the planet... I don't know. It would make some sense for these to be the same. Because in both the case of Flowey and potentially Frisk, their unlocking of determination and the timeline control came from being near death. So the planet unlocking a similar mechanic when it dies is thematically consistent and mechanically consistent. However, I am becoming a little, I don't know, I'm a little less confident in the time loop than I once was. Even if I think it's thematically resonant. I don't know, there's just, it may be that there's something thematically adjacent to a time loop without literally being a time loop. So it's possible on that front. I would say stocks are slightly up. I'm not entirely certain on it, but I think there's enough discussion on fate and destiny and things playing out in a predestined path. That would make sense. And just the structure of Deltarune encourages replayability, which makes more sense if it's a time loop situation. So, yeah. And on a meta level, it's literally stuck in a time loop because it's a video game. And all video games are stuck in a time loop. So, yeah, I'd say stocks are slightly up. Shadow crystals show past cycles of the time loop. Almost without exception, shadow crystals show things that existed in the past. But as far as this chapter is concerned, actually, there was one shadow crystal that I saw which showed Chris looking up and seeing Susie glaring down at them from a far-off window, which sounds like Chris in the past looking up at the apartment building that Susie lives in and seeing her glaring down from one of the higher windows. So that supports my theory, but I think there's another shadow crystal dialogue that I didn't see. Oh, that's interesting. For some strange reason, for a brief moment, it looked like everyone else disappeared and you saw Noelle smiling at you with arms full of flowers. Oh, I've never read that before this exact moment. You're getting my blind reaction to that. Okay. Interesting. I mean, that doesn't disprove anything. Chris and Noelle did spend more time together in the past. So them being at the flower shop and Noelle holding a bunch of flowers would make sense as something that was true historically. You can look at it in Toriel's house in chapter 5 and it says, you thought you saw your mother holding someone else, but it's unclear what that means. And also, given that you get that in chapter 5, it could just be flashing back to chapter 4 when she was holding Sans. But it could also be referencing holding Asgore. It could be referencing a lot of things. It could be referencing holding Azrael. It could be referencing her holding. Like, that could be hugging or holding. That could mean a lot of things. So that doesn't disprove anything. Okay. Okay, I was just making sure I didn't miss any other dialogue. That's fascinating. Chao crystals show past cycles of the time loop. I think the evidence is stonks are slightly up. It keeps showing things that are true, that were true in the past. So I think that continues to make sense. Chris will lose a hand. I mean, they haven't yet. There is imagery in the garden of Chris-shaped hedges getting decapitated or getting chopped up in some way, shape, or form. So that could be foreshadowing. But it's neutral. It's unclear. Susie is part human. I would say stonks are slightly up on this front. I think her reactions to, I'll say, saying that humans don't have tails, and her subsequent reactions to Rousey's treatment of Orange could absolutely be read through the lens that she is interpreted. She is kind of that she has a human ancestry, and yeah, I think that's just stonks are slightly up. I don't think there's any hard evidence, but I think the fact that they brought up her tail, or brought up tails and humans and discussion of whether humans have tails, and Susie was kind of iffy about it, was enough to make this potentially, I would say stonks are slightly up, to put it simply. Susie was not originally a chosen hero. This is basically saying that Susie was not originally the hero from the prophecy. It was originally Noelle. But because the prophecy is vague, it could be tricked or manipulated into replacing the monster from the prophecy with a different monster. And so I think originally it was probably Noelle, and that's why she was like, the logic being like, there's all these ribbons that Susie refuses to wear, but Noelle is happy to wear, and Noelle wore ribbons in the past. And Rousey even says that Susie's the one who's supposed to wear the ribbons. But what he really means is that the monster from the prophecy is supposed to wear the ribbons. So I think there's evidence for that, and I think as far as chapter 5 is concerned, I don't know if there's anything hard proving this. I mean, she talks about how she changed. She used to be a not heroic character, and now she is one. So, you could argue stonks are up. I would say it's neutral. I think it's kind of interesting that she ultimately accepts wearing ribbons in this chapter, because it makes you wonder, was there a prophecy saying that the girl or the monster or whatever has to wear ribbons? Like, it mentions it, and so Susie is, like, whether it's Noelle or Susie, one of them has to be the hero, and whoever it is will wear ribbons, which is, I don't know, that's an interesting thought. If we ever get more information on the prophecy, I would be very interested if there was anything about ribbons. Unrelated, but you know what would be really cool is if there was some way, like, if part of the game was that, part of the story of the game had it, like, I don't know, like maybe after we beat it or after we play a certain route, it unlocks a version of Deltarune where Susie Noelle replaces Susie, and we can just play through the whole game again, but Susie has been replaced by Noelle, and it's Noelle doing all these adventures, and Susie is the side character. That would be interesting, just to kind of see us try to bend fate, and all it ends up doing is replacing one hero for another. That would be cool. It'd be interesting. I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but it would be really nifty. Next up, Cyril's scheme to have Susie replace Noelle as the girl in the prophecy. This is tied up with this, which is that Susie was not the original hero, it was Noelle, and the reason this swap happened was because of manipulation from the mayor. We haven't got enough about the mayor to really say anything about that. Dark fountains are wounds in Earth's soul. Basically, this is the idea, this is tied up with the Earth having a soul theory, and it's the fact that The only thing that can animate dead things or inanimate things in both games is the power of the soul. And so I think the fact that Dark Fountains can do this supports the notion that Dark Fountains are some sort of soul energy, and thus that they stem from the planet. They stem from the Earth itself, the Earth's soul. And it's constantly made clear that Dark Fountains are being pulled from the Earth. So I think the idea that Dark Fountains are wounds in the Earth's soul has a lot of credence to it. My only issue with this theory... Well, I don't have an issue with it. I think it's true. But as far as Chapter 5 is concerned, we do get imagery where it's, again, that one save point where you can first see Flower Castle. It says, the Earth breathes a pillar of darkness into the sky, which, framing the pillar as a breath kind of sidesteps the whole it's a wound thing, because breath is natural, whereas a wound is unnatural. Although too many Dark Fountains is still established to cause the end of the world, Azrael and Flowery talk about that. So it doesn't really make sense for Dark Fountains being framed as breath or something good or natural to also cause the end of the world. So I would say it being framed as breath would make it stunk slightly down, but the insistence on Dark Fountains being something that will bring the end of the world pushes it back in favor, so I would say it's neutral. Noelle is transgender. This is the theory that, well, Noelle's trans, but it's based on a number of different things. But before Chapter 3 and 4, it was just based on the fact that, well, she's designed after a white-tailed deer, and white-tailed deer, only the males have antlers, and Noelle has antlers. And... some people will be like, oh, she's not a deer, she's a reindeer. One, she doesn't look like a reindeer. She looks like a deer. And two, even if she was a reindeer, female reindeers have smaller antlers than the males, whereas Noelle's antlers are the same size as Rudy's. So, I guess they could both be trans. But I don't think so. Actually, that logic doesn't make sense. Never mind. Point is, biologically speaking, it seemed feasible that Noelle was trans. And thematically, there's some argument for it because, being stuck in a role you didn't choose, wanting to choose a different path, being pressured by society. I think one of the big themes of Deltarune is the idea of us being trapped in these roles assigned to us by outside forces like destiny or society or your family, whatever. That certainly has some overlap with the transgender experience. And also in Chapter 2, there is a unused version of Noelle's room in Queen's Mansion in the code. That shows what appears to be little pills on her bedside table, which could be read as, hormone replacement therapy pills, or HRT. Although, given what we see in Chapter 5, them being antidepressants is also extremely feasible. Although antidepressants and HRT, name a more iconic duo. That is a joke about depression and transgenderism. I don't actually know if you can take antidepressants and HRT at the same time. There might be some medical reason that you can't do that. But I don't know that. Anyway, point is, those were the theories before Chapter 3 and 4. Then Chapter 4 just had you go to Noelle's bedroom, and it's literally just the trans flag. Like, I've never played Celeste, but I know there's like a DLC where you get to go to the main character's room, and there's a trans flag on the wall. And Toby Fox was like, I'm going to do that, but technically more subtle by having it be, oh, her whole room is the trans flag. It's like, it's the most unnatural color palette for a bedroom I've ever seen in my life. It's just bright pink, bright baby blue, and white. And it's just like, okay, Toby Fox. And hilariously, there is actually... Now, all of that is before Chapter 5, so none of that matters for this tier list. However, there is a line, hilariously, that supports this interpretation, which is that when you talk to the one guy who's obsessed with donuts during the festival in the normal route, he says, "Curse this round dough." And Susie is like, "Hey, watch it, bub. She's not that fat," or whatever. And the joke is that the name of a female deer is a doe. And so, you know, the guy's talking about like the bat, you know, like dough as in baking, because he's obsessed with donuts. But Susie is humorously misunderstanding it and thinking he's talking about Noelle, because doe is a female deer. Why is this relevant? Because doe is the name of a female deer, not the name of a female reindeer. Reindeer females are called, I think, cows or calves. What was it? I think it was cows. Yeah, a cow. A female reindeer is called a cow, not a doe. So not only does she look like a white-tailed deer, but it's being acknowledged by Susie that she looks like a deer and not a reindeer. So hilariously, stonks are up. Stonks are indeed up. And, and if you want to get, like, I guess a little thematic or meta, the Weird Route is all about how Noelle has a lot more going on beneath the surface than people are assuming. So there being a more complex reality to her gender than just cis female, it wouldn't be unprecedented for a character who is also like, "God, I hate this damn town. I just want to get out of here. I hate being me. I hate these people." And, I love the dark turn Noelle takes in that route. Again, Noelle is my new favorite character after the Weird Route. She is so much more interesting now. The reveal that, like, this whole cute, fluffy girl next door routine is all just a lie. Well, not a lie, but a mask she's been wearing because it's what's expected of her. And underneath that, she secretly resents it and hates it. It hates being herself. She hates this town. She hates being alive. It's crazy. It's genuinely insane how much more depth there is to Noelle than I could have ever foreseen. She's fantastic. She's the best character. Genuinely, just the coolest character Toby Fox has ever written. She is my favorite character. I cannot wait to see what else she does. But I digress. That's the Noelle's trans theory. Chris originally befriended Susie to manipulate her. This is part of the whole Carol scheme to have Susie replace Noelle thing, but specifically Chris was part of it. Chris was sent to manipulate Susie into filling some role, either in the prophecy or in Carol's schemes or whatever, but then things got complicated because Chris genuinely ended up befriending Susie. Yeah, so did this theory gain any credence? Nah, I don't think this was supported or hurt or anything. I don't think we're not really getting any insight into Chris's motivations in this chapter as far as her, as far as Susie's relevance to their story goes. Ralsei's arc is about self-actualization. Yeah, baby. Stonks are slightly up. Stonks are way up, actually. Like, the constant interactions between him and Flowery, Ralsei choosing to self-actualize by, reshaping his bedroom, him choosing to step out of Azriel's step out of Azriel's shadow, and be a bit more aggressive and a bit more violent. Him attacking Flowery, very un-Azriel-like, which feeds into the idea of him becoming more than just Azriel. And yeah, him acting a little bit more like Flowey, and him choosing to dress up like a princess and be like, hey, maybe
this would be fun. He does that of his own free will. You don't ask him to do that. Now, you can be like, he dresses up as the princess. He's like, I've been a prince, but you know, I'd be, you know, he's interested in trying to be a princess. He's like, I'll be your princess, Chris. And you can be like, bro, no. And the princess outfit just in like one frame is gone. Rousey's just instantly like, I apologize for trying to self-actualize my lord and master, Chris Deltarune. And it's like, oh, you poor baby. Like, Rousey's still not all the way there. Rousey has gone from, I shouldn't self-actualize, I shouldn't even be, I exist to serve and nothing else, to, well, I guess it's just okay to self-actualize if Chris and Susie say it's okay. Like, so he still hasn't finished his arc. He hasn't gotten to the point where he's like, I should self-actualize for my own sake and regardless of what other people want me to do. He hasn't gotten there yet. He's still at the stage of, I guess I can express myself if that's what Susie wants and if Chris is okay with it. So he's like, I guess I'll be a princess. Speaking of which, where is that theory? Yeah, Rousey will identify as a girl. Let's just grab that while we're here. I mean, he tried to be a princess this chapter. It just happened. And Flowery called him a princess. That, even if it was for one scene, Rousey did identify as a girl, very momentarily. Unless Chris is like, stop now. You know, Rousey identifies that way for a brief moment. So yeah. But yeah, self-actualization. I think this is stonks her up. It's hard. I can't go all the way to Apollo Blesses Me because this is about character arcs and thematic analysis, and that's inherently a bit subjective. So I can't go all the way to Apollo Blesses Me, but I will put it in stonks her up. Okay, we've made some good progress. Unfortunately, I have to take a break because I got places to be, unfortunately. I'm recording in the morning before I have to go to work. Yeah, I'm going to have to take a break for now, but I'll be back. We've made some good progress. How many theories have we covered? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. About half, like just under halfway there. Okay, that's a good session. All right, we will pick this up in my second recording session. Okay, I am back for the second session of my recording for this video. Full disclaimer, it's been like 2 weeks since I recorded the first chunk, so yeah, if anything weird occurs in the second half, that's probably why. It also means I've had a lot of time to think about Deltarune and my theories and whatnot, so I've come up with some bangers. I'm gonna be honest. I got some great ideas in the works, I should say. But anyway, let's wrap this up. I want to get this out so I can focus on my other projects. Okay, Gaster is the Antichrist. Chapter 5 barely acknowledges Gaster's existence in any way, shape, or form. Neutral. Gaster is working with demons. Well, okay. If this was just saying demons exist in the plot, then it would go and stonks are slightly up, or maybe even stonks are just straight up. But specifically Gaster's working with demons, again, there's really no discussion of Gaster, so neutral. Friend and Eram are demons. Okay. Yeah, this one's going in, I want to say, yes. It's either stonks are slightly up or stonks are just straight up. I gotta stop saying that. It sounds stupid. Yeah, before the information we got from the new shop dialogue from Pink about the friend and protein and cats and all that, I would have said this is stonks are, I don't know, maybe slightly up since we keep seeing friend in all these dark worlds, but it would have been debatable, really. However, with the new information about the hunting pack and someone who liked them and all that stuff,
I'm very tempted to put this into stonk syrup. Like, very, very tempted. Um, I mean, it's definitely hinting at to the true nature of Friend. And I don't think it's implying that Friend is a normal pack of cats. They're clearly some nightmare thing. And they appear in a bunch of Dark Worlds, even though that shouldn't be possible. And yeah, I'm gonna be bold. I'm gonna say stonks are up on this one. I think there's increasing evidence of this being true. Also, I'm recording this relatively early in the morning, so if my voice sounds a little craggy, then that's why. Gaster wants knowledge, power, and control over the Red Soul. Gaster's not really discussed in this chapter. The device is the machine at the end of the True Lab. Yeah, I would say stonks are slightly up on this one. I can't say for, like, I would love to say, oh, the insert chapter 7 side B stuff proves, or, adds to this, but all that proves is that the device Gaster is watching Deltarune through is a machine of some point with, like, a machine of some point. A machine of some sort. Why was I struggling with that? However, it doesn't prove specifically what that machine is. It's a CRT, it's some old piece of crap technology, but it doesn't prove that it's the specific machine at the end of the True Lab. So, I mean, it proves that it adds to the idea that Gaster's watching us through a machine of some sort, a device, as it were. So you could argue the stonks are slightly up, but I feel like it's a bridge too far to say that the specific machine got any evidence in this chapter. Nobody is metafictional. Basically, this is the idea that nobody in Deltarune is aware they're in a video game, or is aware of their reality being a video game, or is aware of the player, nothing, stuff like that. This is a weird one, because this isn't really something that can gain evidence, like, either characters continue to not acknowledge that they're in a video game and continue to not interact with the player, or they don't, or they do start acting meta. So I would say, well, the most meta thing that happens in this story is the Weird Route stuff where, it says insert side whatever. However, that being framed as an in-universe element, as someone else's television, someone else's monitor, actually makes me feel like this is stonks are slightly up, maybe stonks are up, because it emphasizes that even the most meta thing happening right now is something happening in universe. But, I'm sure others would say, well, isn't it being meta at all, proof against this? Even if it exists in the universe, it's still trying to be meta, right? The thing is, when Toby Fox wants to be meta, he doesn't, I don't think he hides behind this subterfuge of being like, oh, it's a monitor in universe that someone else is looking at. It's like, he'll just close the the game. He'll have the game's title change, or there are 1,000 meta ways to interact with the player, and this doesn't really pursue any of those. So I guess I'll put in stonks just slightly up, but like I said at the start, these middle 3 tiers are all debatable. Titans are the Earth's defense mechanism. I think there's sufficient evidence for this just in chapter 4. I mean, their theme music is literally called Guardian, I think. So yeah, but Titans aren't really brought up in this chapter, so neutral. Also, I wanted to clarify something. I rewatched the first chunk of this to refresh myself, the first chunk of this video to refresh myself on what the heck I was saying. And I do actually want to clarify something. I might have cut it out or put a note on screen or whatever, but at one point I said that Noelle states that Chris only came over to her house when Asriel was also already there. And that was a mistake. I was mixing up something she says in chapter 4, where she says she's not used to seeing Chris at church without Asriel.
We don't actually know for certain that Chris only went to the holiday household when Azrael was there. Now, it's still absolutely possible that they only went when Azrael was there, and I think it's feasible that Chris's interest in the holidays is a side effect of their interest in Azrael, which is to say, Azrael is Chris's only friend, and they don't really want to share, I don't think. But I digress. I just wanted to clarify that Noelle does not specifically say, Chris only came over when Asher was already at her house. I don't think that was specifically said. I think I got mixed up. But just wanted to clarify that. Deltarune and Undertale are alternate universes. Did this gain any evidence in this chapter? I mean, it depends on what you define as evidence, I don't know. We're not really tackling cosmic stuff in this chapter. Sans killed the Undertale version of Gaster. We got further proof that Sans from Deltarune is going to end up in the world of Undertale, and Gaster is dead, and Sans has a Gaster blaster. So you could argue stonks are slightly up. I'm not going to pretend that it's whatever. It really doesn't get discussed. Deltarune Sans is the same person as Undertale Sans. Stonks are up. That's just stonks are up. He has the postcard or whatever, the punch card. Demons are created from a combo of essence and determination. This doesn't get discussed. We don't really tackle demons. Chris and Caddy's demon ritual created friend. Caddy does have a line where she's talking about how she abandoned Chris in the midst of the ritual, which adds credence to the idea that Caddy and Chris's demon ritual was legitimate and actually did something. But whether it created friend is debatable. I'll put it in stonks are slightly up because I think they definitely did something and it definitely resulted in a demon showing up. But whether it was specifically friend, whether it had been summoned or created, is all very much unclear at this stage. Friend is a demon made from Mutler's essence. Stonks are slightly up. Actually, stonks might be just a straight up. Because what would be scarier to a cat girl like Caddy than a demonic dog? So I'd actually put this in... Oh, you know what? This is assuming Friend is the demon they summoned. Friend is established in this chapter to be cat-based, not dog-based. So actually, stonks are kind of down on this one. Yeah, no, I'd actually drop this into stonks are down. Demons and amalgams are a closely related phenomenon. Yeah, I would say stonks are slightly up on this, just because we are establishing that Friend was likely an amalgamation of a pack of cats. So I think that has some basis in lore. Gaster was the inventor of the DT extraction machine. Neutral. The DT extraction machine was made to help create demons. Neutral. Save files are timelines created by Earth. Oh, have I not been explaining anything? I think I was explaining my theories as I went through them, wasn't I? Most of these concepts are self-explanatory, like Friend and Rouse ARAM are demons. Deltarune Sans is the same person as Undertale Sans. Closely related phenomena. Chris and Caddy's demon. The Undertale version of Gaster. Okay, no, everything's been fairly self-explanatory. Yeah. I guess this bit about essence. Basically, essence is the memory or lingering imprint of a living being that lingers on in their remains after they die. It is this lingering essence, this memory of who they once were, that allows that essence to be used to create both darkners, like the old man,
who have memories of, being their Lightner counterpart, as well as more unique anomalies like Flowey, who remembers being Asriel because of the dust that was scattered on the flower. Basically, essence is a concept that I'm realizing now I really need to make a video about this, or emphasize this point. Essence and memory are perhaps thematically identical. Like, it embodies the concept of memory. Memory is very important in this series. And when you realize the essence of the dead lingering in their corpse is functionally a supernatural memory of who they once were that can be utilized to create darkners or demons, it starts to meld together with the game's themes in a way that seems a lot more intentional. Or a lot more significant. But yeah, anyway, just explaining that. DT Extraction Machine, for those who've forgotten, this is the machine in the True Lab of Undertale that is implied to be the machine that was used to extract determination from the human souls. And this argues that the D2 extraction machine was originally made in Deltarune with the goal of creating demons, and then Undertale Gaster just copied the design. That's why Undertale Gaster has blueprints for this machine, but does not have the machine itself. Either way. Okay, so that's all explained. Toriel put Chris in therapy. I think I went a little too far with this angle. I think I'm still not entirely sure what to make of the chapter 4 egg room with the doctor's office, the art therapy. Like, leaping to the conclusion that the Eggman was a therapist who worked with Chris is perhaps assuming too much. It might be assuming that just because the Eggman showed up there, that in life he played the role, he played some role in Chris's life. When in reality, it could be that that room is there because of Chris, and the Eggman is just there because the Eggman's always at the fringe of reality, and this place is a memory of some sort, a memory of a place. Now, whether I think I might have gone too far in assuming the Eggman played a role in Chris's past, but saying Toriel put Chris in therapy feels like a pretty reasonable conclusion based off that sequence. Now, did Chapter 5 add any evidence to the pile of Chris being put in therapy? I don't know. I don't think so. Although I will say, the evidence that Noelle has been abusing Chris for a long time is interesting, and could argue that Chris, even if they weren't put in therapy, they have more reasons to be put in therapy than we realized. God, have I mentioned Noelle's just the best character? She is so freaking fun. Chris met the Forgotten Men therapy. This has gotten no extra evidence. I'm putting it in neutral. I'm not even sure I believe in it anymore. The Deltarune version of Gaster is the Forgotten Man. This has credence, actually, and because the music that plays in the egg room in this chapter is a slow down version of the Scarlet Forest theme, I think. And I think, inexplicably, that song has the Gaster leitmotif. I think back in the day, I think Andrew Cunningham did a video on this, where he was like, yeah, here's all the songs that actually almost certainly do have Gaster's theme in it. And this was one of them, I think. I might be misremembering. This might be misinformation. But I think this was one of the more baffling ones, where it was like, what the hell does this forest have to do with Gaster? But now, it's been associated with the Eggman. And that, I think, is hinting at him being a version of Gaster. So yeah, I would say stonks are slightly up on this one. There is both an Undertale Gaster and a Deltarune Gaster. Yeah? Did this gain any extra evidence this chapter? Well, we know that the Eggman... I guess because this got stonks slightly up, that means this got stonks slightly up. So I'd say yes. Mostly because, it's clear that the Eggman and the Gaster who talks to us, at the start of the game are different entities. And in fact, it seems that the Gaster who talks to us throughout the game is at odds with this Eggman, the Forgotten Man, I should say. And that would make sense for the only person Gaster would consider an irritable, thorn in his side
to be another version of himself. He gives that kind of egotistical energy. So yeah, I think the evidence supporting the Eggman being a version of Gaster would support the idea that there is two Gasters. Noelle is the original chosen hero before Susie. I mean, just the fact that Noelle has a history with Chris and was even trying to force them into romantic relationships that they were not interested in, and just the fact that Noelle also bullied Chris, just like Susie now bullies Chris, or, did initially at the start of the game, very much shows that Noelle filled a very similar role to Susie in Chris's life. So I would say Stonks are slightly up on that one. Jevil is able to remember past timelines. We do not discuss Jevil at any length. And in fact, this theory was based off of perhaps an outdated assumption that the only secret boss weapon that shows up in the hometown or the castle town is Jevil's, but I've gotten comments saying that other secret boss weapons can show up there, which doesn't prove this theory is wrong, but it just proves that Jevil may not be the only one who remembers past timelines. Jevil's nihilism is stems from his awareness of the time loop. Neither Jevil nor the concept of a time loop are given much attention in this chapter. Castletown is named after the player because of the time loop. Neutral. I don't even know what to make of that at this stage. In fact, I'm not even sure I believe it myself, because thinking about it, it's possible that the reason that these characters know of this name of the player is because we used it on the Goner in the Goner Maker, or we used it when discussing the Goner in the Goner Maker. And Gaster and demons and Goners and all this stuff are all buried in the shelter and doing mysterious stuff, and they seem to be able to go to any dark world they want. So them leaking information out could just be the explanation. Now, I still personally think that the sequence at the start of the game happens at the end of the timeline, but that's just me. We do the Goner Maker sequence at the end of the timeline. Oh yeah, that. Neutral. No, there's not much information on that. And you might be frustrated that, so much of these are going into these three tiers in the middle, which all basically amount to the same thing of, we don't know if, these three tiers basically contain the vast majority of these theories, and most of them, and these three tiers basically embody, I don't know, not much was discussed. And I know that might be annoying, but unfortunately, this is just a symptom of Chapter 5 just not really tackling much in the way of the deep lore. It does tackle it in some small ways. There is stuff there, especially with Noelle. But, I'm not the only one to point out that a lot of Chapter 5 is very self-contained. Shadow crystals originate from the Roaring Knight. I'd say Stonks are slightly down on this one. Yeah, maybe even Stonks are down, because Pink inexplicably has one, and the Roaring Knight was definitely not there. And it also seems that anyone can manifest these, since they're like lost dreams or whatever. So yeah, I would say Shadow Crystals originating from the Night. I mean, I'm not saying the Shadow Crystals can't come from the Roaring Knight. In fact, I would say it's entirely probable that some of the Roaring Knights, some of the Shadow Crystals originate from them. However, do you reckon... I assume Lost Dreams have to be the Lost Dreams of Lightners, and not just Darkners. I assume Darkners can't make these, but I could be wrong. However, if only Lightners can make these, then it kind of raises some questions about whose Lost Dreams these are. Chapter 2 is easy. It's the Lost Dream of Metaton. Chapter 3... Did I say Chapter 3? Chapter 2 with the spam-to Neo robot, it's very clearly the lost dream of Mettaton. With Chapter 3, we get it from the Roaring Knight, which shows that... yeah, and to be clear, this... the Roaring Knight literally produced a lost dream. It makes you wonder which lost dream it was. Ah, that's interesting. Because they lost the dream after a fight with Chris and Susie and Rouse in front of Toriel. That, why would this encounter make them lose a dream? It's almost like it would only make sense for that to have such an impact on them if they are family, if it is Azrael. So that's actually very interesting. I don't see why December would lose a dream from this encounter. But Azrael would lose a dream. Anyway, so yeah. Yeah, so this theory here, like the Knight did produce a shadow crystal. We know that much. However, it's not necessarily... This theory is that all of the shadow crystals were from the Roaring Knight, and I think that's incorrect. We don't have 1,000,000% confirmation. Maybe the Roaring Knight planted some of these, but I'm pretty sure this is either stonks or down or debunked. Chapter 4's Shadow Crystal was just in the old man's desk. You could argue that's the lost dream of the old man of Gerson, but I don't think so. Gerson doesn't give the impression of someone who lost a dream. I think it makes more sense for this to be Alvin's lost dream. And like him having given up on his dreams of being a writer and of being his own, of getting out of his father's shadow. So I think that's where that one came from. As for the Chapter 5 Shadow Crystal, we get that from Pink. They say themselves, it just appeared in their pocket. I would assume it was the lost dream of, similar to Mettaton, of having their own body or having their own something or another. It was a dream they'd long since given up on, hence why it was lost, and it instantly manifested when they entered the Dark World. But ironic, I don't know. So I think stonks are down or debunked for this one. Of course, that raises the question of where did Jevil get his Shadow Crystal from? Because he has almost no connection to anyone as far as Lightners go. It would make sense if this was Jevil's lost dream of freedom, or Sham's lost dream of losing his best friend, or their best friend. But then that would be a Darkner creating it, and I don't think that's true. That doesn't seem consistent with what we've seen. So no, I don't know. I don't know where Jevil got his Shadow Crystal. It could have been anyone though. It was a classroom. Anybody could have lost a dream in the classroom. Yeah, I would say stonks are pretty hard down on this. I won't go full debunked, but it is borderline. Demons are functionally just ghosts who don't have souls. Demons don't really get brought up. Darkness erodes memory. Yeah, this one's going straight up into stonks are up. We look in the mirror at the start of this chapter and go, who the heck are you? Chris has memory loss. Onion-san has memory loss. Well, Onion-san isn't in this chapter. Not living, anyway. But as far as memory goes, we see Chris their memories have been eroded. And, that's pretty solid evidence, honestly. Now, admittedly, you could be like, well, maybe that isn't the product of Chris specifically being in the darkness. But I'm not so sure. Also, we got the new secret text from the unused character that was like, don't forget, which seems like setting up dramatic, tragic irony of, Azrael being the Roaring Knight, but having lost most, he's struggling to retain his identity and his memory of who he is.
because the darkness is eroding it. Is there any other memory-related incidences in Chapter 5 that support darkness eroding memory? I don't recall. And, some people might be like, well, if darkness erodes memory, why aren't Chris and Susie, struggling? Or why aren't the Darkners struggling? Well, I assume Darkners aren't affected by this because they're not alive. They're mundane objects who are just given personality. They are dreams, in a manner of speaking. But as far as Chris and Susie are concerned, I think they just haven't been exposed enough to have forgotten these events. And Susie in particular. But Chris has been constantly doing all sorts of shenanigans with darkness, and and I think the fact that their memory is eroded enough that they don't even recognize themselves. I don't know. I think something has to be supernaturally altering people's memories in order for Don't Forget to be such an integral part of this narrative. So I don't know. I'm going to go darkness erodes memory as stonks are up. I think there's a mounting evidence for it. Yeah, it could be slightly up. I guess I'll put it in stonks just slightly up. We don't, just because Chris is having memory loss, they've got enough going on that you could explain their memory loss without involving darkness. I think it's probably true, but I wouldn't say Chapter 5 super boosts it. Gaster is a fish. The Forgotten Man hides behind a tree. That's not very fish-like. But then again, Chiron and Shira live above water and float around like magic little goobers. So it doesn't really prove anything. It is really funny to look at it like a flounder bloody fish and be like, there's a man here. I mean, there's all this stuff at the lake. And a lake equal water equal fish. It's neutral. I don't think anything really came of it in this chapter. Funny enough, I think a lot of comments on the original video where I predicted this, that my pre-chapter 5 predictions, a lot of people are like, Jaru, you were right. They went in the lake. Gaster is a fish. Which is very funny. Being in the dark world grants you a body made of dark matter. I'm going to put this in stonks or slightly up because it is particular attention is brought to the fact that, Chris can shapeshift, which isn't something they can do in the light world. So yeah, stonks are slightly up. Darkners are molded by the hopes and dreams of Lightners. Yeah, stonks are certainly up. Flowey is explicitly powered by dreams. He talks endlessly about hopes and dreams and Asgore's hopes and dreams and all this stuff. Yeah, I would say this is correct. It might even just go straight up into stonks are up. They have a whole sequence at the end be like, thank you for watching my dream, and stuff. And so it's like, yeah, this is probably true. We'll put it in stonks slightly. It's still vague enough that you could argue against it. Light world clock hands point towards past or future dark worlds. One of the clocks pointed towards Asgore's shop. Stonks are up. The earth dying is the reason Darkners will become statues in the Roaring. Neutral. This is just the theory that Darkners derive their life force from the soul of the planet, and when the soul dies, so will the Darkners. Undying the Undying was powered by the earth. Shockingly, she didn't come up. The angel and the earth are at odds. Didn't really come up. And in fact, it's unclear. I mean, we did definitely have people praying to the angel. Even Darkners are praying to the angel. So it's possible the angel and the earth are one and the same, but it's hard to say. The core from Undertale is powered by a dark fountain. Didn't really come up.
Reality must be destabilized for saving and loading to be possible. Yeah, this just holds that you can't, that reality itself has to be unstable before the saving and loading mechanic becomes available, either through wounds in the earth, such as, dark fountains, or by accumulating a dense amount of determination in one spot, or by going deeper underground and getting closer to the earth's soul, etc. Doesn't really come up. December is based on Ness and Ninten from the Mother series. What, did we learn anything of note about Des this chapter that could be read as referencing Ninten and Ness from the Mother series? I don't know. Although, it's funny. People, when I made that theory, they often pointed out, hey, why did you reference Mother 3? Because, to avoid spoilers, I won't detail it, but there is a plot involving siblings in that game that could very much be read as mirroring what happened with Des. However, I actually disagree with that reading. I think it's more a parallel to Azrael, because, it's about your sibling in that game. It's about Lucas's sibling. And it's aka the protagonist's sibling has bad things going on. And what do you know? My theory is all that Azrael is the Roaring Knight and bad things are going on. So yeah, again, I'm not gonna, it's hard to tiptoe. I don't even know. Do I even need to tiptoe around Mother 3 spoilers? Whatever. It's like it is what it is. But I actually think Mother 3 foreshadows, it could have been an inspiration for what's going on with Azrael in this game. But as far as December, Azrael was in love with her. That's something. Does Ness and does December having Riz count as being a reference to Ness and Ninten from the Mother series? I don't know. I'm gonna put it in neutral. I'd have to really hyper analyze some stuff in order to make sense of that theory in the context of Chapter 5, and I don't think I'd find much, even if I did. We play as December controlling the Red Soul. Stocks are up! Holy cow, stocks are up. Like, just the fact that the Weird Route exists, just the fact that Noelle's like, yeah, my life fell apart until when December left, but now that you, not Chris, are here, I feel like I can be free again. It's like, yeah. Also, why would the soul care about doing all this stuff with Noelle? If we were just evil, McEvil, Kara, no mercy, whatever, then we could do this with anybody. But we're doing it with Noelle, and thanks to Chapter 5, we know she's not just a tool to serve our purposes, she is the goal. The point of the route is to liberate her. She is the one who takes control in this sequence. December, one of the few bits of characterization we get about December is how much she cared about Noelle. And what does this route do? It has you doing a lot of stuff to help Noelle. And even if you're like, oh, but what about the weird romantic potential subtext of the Weird Route? Wouldn't that make this weird? Not necessarily. Clearly, this version of December that we are, allowing to exist in the Weird Route is a bit more morally compromised. So, as far as we know, it could just be December being like, oh yeah, Noelle always wanted to force Chris into a relationship they didn't want. Why don't we facilitate that? So, even if you have to focus on the romantic subtext, which you don't even have to, you could even easily say that the romantic subtext is all about Chris and the everything else Weird Route stuff is all about December. You can separate them pretty easily. But either way, I don't think any of it really hurts this theory. If anything, it just adds an extra layer of disturbing content to the proceedings. It really shows that Chris is the tool being used in this timeline, in this narrative. Quite the flipperoo. But yeah, we play as December Controlling Your Soul. I think stocks are mega up. Just the fact the Weird Route even happens the way it does in Chapter 5. And the way Noelle's specifically references December. and how it's like her real self went away when December left, and now her real self is coming back out again thanks to us in the weird route. Like, stonks are up. Deltarune ends with Sans escaping to Undertale. I mean, stonks are up. The Undertale Mystery Man is a fusion of the Undertale Sans and Gaster. Who knows? This is one of the bigger mysteries of my theories regarding Sans and Gaster, is that, yes, we now know that Deltarune Sans goes on to Undertale and is Undertale Sans. However, these are separate universes. There are duplicates of every character, so where's the Undertale Sans? You know? What happened to him? So, yeah. The Deltarune Papyrus will die during the roaring. This is a theory that I'm just... it's not debunked. It's neutral. Nothing's happened. But I don't think I believe in it anymore. Mostly because there was some newsletter where Papyrus talked about some stuff, and his memory is clearly all messed up, and he clearly remembers being on the surface to some capacity, even though that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, I think it's increasingly probable that Undertale Papyrus is Deltarune Papyrus. Or at least there's something more deep going on than just Deltarune Papyrus died, big Sag. Chris got December killed. Did this really get discussed at any length? I would say stonks are slightly up because of the Asgore note. The sword route established that Chris did something to kill a black deer. And, you know, the Asgore notes make it clear that it happened in the shelter. There was a dark world at the time. And what do you know? Who is the absolute monarch of creating dark fountains? It's Chris. Chris seems to be responsible for the majority of the dark fountains that exist in this setting. So, yeah, I think the stonks are slightly up on this one. Yeah, wow, and that's it. Woo! I feel like I had a lot more to say on the first chunk. Well, the issue is, a lot of these are just stuff that wasn't brought up. It's either stuff involving the end game of the story, which this chapter is very much being like, hey, let's not think about the end game. Let's focus on one last fun adventure. And so a lot of these theories just didn't really get discussed. And everything else, like, again, the three middle tiers are very much, you can shift them around however you like. So the only ones that really matter are stonks are down. I think Shadow Crystals being made of pure hope got hit pretty hard. Friend being Muttler got hit pretty hard. Shadow Crystals originating from the Roaring Knight got hit pretty hard. I think these were all weakened. And then, however, because I'm, you know, confirmation bias man, far more got boosted or even confirmed. Or else I did identify as a girl in this chapter, even if only for a few seconds. Ralsei is made from Azrael's dust, got super boosted. Ralsei continues to act more and more and more like Azrael and has more and more and more of Azrael's powers. The weird route is not about romance, got boosted. You can say there's subtext there about it, and I you know what? I've actually come around. I was talking to someone about this in the comment section. I realized I was rejecting the romantic subtext of the weird route partially out of defensiveness. A lot of the hate comments on the theory, the Azrael Dust 2.0 theory, made me very defensive. But I realize now that two different readings of the same fiction can be true. It can have romantic subtext and also be about other things. You know, it doesn't, a story does not have to be about one specific thing exclusively. You can have countless different interpretations and readings of a sequence, and they can all be equally valid. So you can choose to read it through a romantic lens. I can choose to read it through a non-romantic lens. However, even with that established, the weird route being not about romance is pretty confidently confirmed here, because Noelle makes it clear she's not actually doing this out of a desire for romance. She's doing it out of a desire for freedom. That's what the route is about. It's about freedom and agency and the roles society forces upon us. And that's not the same as romance. You could say there's romantic undertones to it, but I would not say that is the focus. Hope is Deltarune's core mechanic. Yeah, Hope has become increasingly relevant. It powered Flowery. It was like, yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff. Deltarune takes place before Undertale. The Sand stuff confirmed very strongly supports that. No enhanced red zone on the weird route. I don't know exactly what's happening at the end with the lake, but I think it's becoming increasingly probable that she wants that red soul. Yeah. Ralsei's arc is about self-actualization. That's just explicitly clear. Friend and Eram of Demons. Yeah, that new shop dialogue super duper pushes me in that direction. Deltarune Sands the same, yes. Light Clock Hands, yes. We place December controlling the Red Soul, yes. Deltarune ends with a Sands Scheme Undertale, yes. And, this is perhaps one of the more contentious ones. But again, the Weird Route even existing the way it is makes me think it's about December. So, yeah. And then everything else basically didn't get discussed. Why is this in Stonks are slightly down? I don't remember why I put that there. Whatever the case. Doesn't matter. The middle tiers don't matter. But yeah, okay. So that's a review of all of my theories prior to Deltarune Chapter 5. Some of them, a few of them I don't believe anymore. I think I pointed them out when they appeared. Stuff about Papyrus, I don't think I believe anymore. I don't think I was working with enough information to meaningfully predict anything. And I think thinking Gaster was a therapist is perhaps a bit of a stretch. However, everything else seems more or less feasible. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed my analysis of my pre-Chapter 5 theories. I've got some great stuff in the works about Gaster and Friend and the shelter and what happened to Onion-san and all this stuff. I've got some great ideas. I cannot wait to share them with you guys. And I hope they age better than some of these theories did. Freaking hope. Oh, it's made... shadow crystals are made from hope. I'm such an idiot. I should have been vaguer. It's made of hopes and dreams. I would have been partially correct. I could have pulled it over on Smog and be like, haha, I was technically partly right. Oh, wow. It is what it is. But yeah, I appreciate y'all tuning in, and I look forward to delving deeper into the lore of Deltarune with you all. So yeah. Huge shout outs to all my wonderful supporters on Patreon. Without your help, this sort of content would not be feasible for me to make. So thank you all very much.
A special shout out goes to E-Roll, Limping Penguin, and Tibby Fitzhugh for supporting me on the Noel tier. And a huge shout out goes to Lex.Ham for being the only big shot willing and able to support me on the Spampton tier. I continue to be extremely grateful for all of my patrons and all of your generous support.
And with that said, I think it's time for me to sign off. Like if you enjoyed the video, comment if you've got something to say, subscribe if you want to see more, and as always, have a fantastic day.